Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Andrew and Jerry Save the World. This is episode 97. Andrew and Jerry say, thank you for your attention to this matter. I'm your host. I'm one of your hosts, Andrew Langer.
I'm still Jerry Rogers, even though it's been too long, Andrew Langer.
Well, we've been paying too much attention to this matter, Jerry. That's been the
Yes.
that's been the big thing.
Thank
So,
you for your
yeah.
attention to this matter.
Yes, I am, and I have used this. Here's the thing: my problem right now is I want to use that as my sign off for every email,
Yes.
but I now think that it's going to look really passive aggressive if I do it. There's been a whole really nasty thread on one of the listservs that I've participated in for far too long. A couple of times I signed off with "Thank you for your attention to this matter," and I think it set people off. So, I mean, where do you come down on this, Jerry? If we start doing this,
I think it's absolutely hilarious.
Good.
It gives me the giggles every time I read it. I did not get it the first time you sent it to me because you did it almost immediately after the president's social media post about the Iran bombing. And so I didn't get it right away. But once I got it, I think it's hilarious because it's so Trump.
Yes.
It's so the moment, right? He announces this major event, talks about how now the enemy, Iran, should come to the table for peace, and then he just simply says, "Thank you for your attention in this matter." Like I love it. It's very Trump. It's very in the moment. I think it describes our public discussion right now, where you have some who think it's funny, it's to the point,
Yes.
and others who are, like you said, they're set off by it, and that's just too bad.
I was trying to find, Jerry, as I'm looking at my phone. I promise you I wasn't ignoring you. I was trying to, my favorite one now is the picture of the bomb on the side of which it's written, "Thank you for your attention to this matter."
Yeah, but again, I think those who are set off by it, it also shows you that we're at
Yes.
a second level of TDS syndrome.
Oh yeah. Well, this is I know you wanted to talk quite a bit about this because this gets into everything that's going on here. And I will tell you with this discussion, there's a big discussion about the bombing of Iran and these sites in Iran on Friday. And I was very pleased to see some folks who have been never Trumpers and Trump skeptics actually call balls and strikes here. That is the exception to the rule, however. And I know you wanted to talk about
I
this.
mean, almost immediately we had the legacy media talking about World War III, talking about escalation, talking about intelligence. And then also going to it's unconstitutional. Several Democrats were calling for him to be impeached. And now here we are several days later, and there's no World War III.
Right.
We have a ceasefire talk tentatively holding. We have the Middle East quietly, the countries surrounding Iran. And by the way, I'm going to say Iran, not Iran, because as a kid, I remember the hostage crisis,
Yes.
and of course the song "Bomb Bomb 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 Iran."
Yes.
So in order as a homage to "Bomb Bomb Iran," you're going to hear me say Iran.
Yes. Well, it's funny, it's because I pulled out the old Simpsons chestnut. He had the, I'm going to say this, excuse me, Geraldine. Marge found his Ayatollah Assahola shirt, and he said, "Yes, but Marge, this works for any Ayatollah." And then Homer goes and rattles off a bunch of names of Ayatollahs.
But my concern, though, to your point about I
Yeah.
wanted to talk about this, and I'll just say it very simply, and that is there are some reasonable, level-headed policy experts and voices in the public discussion who have gone off the deep end.
Right.
We're in a tyranny. The Atlantic magazine, which is a center left journal, again, very reasonable. I read it daily. had a piece recently talking about how we are not moving towards despotism and tyranny, but we're in it. And the bombing of Iran is evidence of it. And I'm thinking to myself, how can I take seriously anything the Atlantic puts out again when they're just jumping the shark? How can we be living in tyranny when a guy like Mamdani becomes the Democrat nominee in New York City, a
Right.
communist, socialist, anti-Semitic, progressive, extremist lunatic is now the nominee for the Democratic Party in our nation's largest, most important, most historical city? If we lived in tyranny, this guy would never get on the news, never mind be in a position to
Right.
govern 8.5 million Americans. Or if we lived in tyranny, like the left and like many, like reasonable people, I'll just say this: our friend Wally Olson,
Yeah.
who is a great guy, smart libertarian, Cato. He's promoting this idea that we live in a tyranny, that Trump is acting untethered from the law. It's not true.
Yeah. Well,
He has the authority to bomb Iran, and these other issues where these district courts are issuing national injunctions. Well, higher courts, the Supreme Court, more times than not, are overriding these small courts. In fact, these district courts. In fact, if there's any threat of tyranny, it's really from a very select elite group of a cabal of elitists and judges. But again, we've what is Dante's levels of hell?
Yes.
We're now experiencing various levels of TDS. Andrew, you and I.
Let me hold on, Jerry.
One last point. I'll be quiet.
Yes, go ahead.
You and I call balls and strikes. We are critical of the president. We have been harsh with the president in the past. In fact, my wife sent me an old social media post from me on on candidate Donald Trump.
Yes.
And my goodness, was I
right
harsh. So we are not Trumpers. We might be American firsters in the sense that we want the American worker, the American factory, the American culture.
I want policies
principles
that put the U.S. interests before anybody else's interests. I don't think that's too much to ask here. But this is the thing that gets me in all of this, Jerry. Is I had a conversation yesterday with someone from the State Policy Network, Stephen Johnson, I think it was, who is the head of their Center for Practical Federalism, and this hasn't been released yet. It's part of this series that I've been doing for the Federal Newswire on the REINS Act, which is the REINS Act, for those of you who don't know, is a piece of legislation that is one of the many steps to codify this idea that Congress should take a better role in and a stronger role in executive branch policy. That we can't just let the executive branch sort of do whatever it wants to do. And so part of this was expressed in the overturning of the Chevron doctrine a year ago. In fact, there's an analysis the Senate has done on this. And setting aside for a moment that in the wake of this decision overturning Chevron, you had folks like Elizabeth Warren putting out pieces of legislation to essentially take the power that they have been granted once again, right? That originates within the Congress, right? The representative branch of government, the Democratic branch of government, they wanted to push that back into the bureaucracy, this power that they'd been
which is the opposite of what they're arguing. Hold
on, and this gets into the point that Stephen Johnson and others have made, which is if the No More Kings movement was really worth a damn, then they would recognize, right, that the REINS Act and any other piece of legislation that tries to put the power to make law back in the legislative branch and away from the executive branch, that they would be in support of this. But of course they're not, because they don't want to get rid of authoritarianism. What they want to do is they want to make sure that left-wing authoritarianism is preserved.
Right,
That's
exactly right. And again, it shows the hypocrisy too when you had Barack Obama execute military campaigns, bombings, and the same people now who are claiming in a very hysterical manner that we live in tyranny, that we should impeach Trump. They were cheerleaders
Well, some of them weren't.
for
Let me hold
Obama.
on, because let's be really fair here. I have much greater sympathy for the libertarians
Yes,
who were, against Obama going in and getting Osama bin Laden, or who were against various other military actions, unilateral
right,
military actions taken by Barack Obama. I don't agree with them. They're
right,
wrong, but at
yes,
least they're intellectually consistent. It's the
yes.
folks who are not
But that's a
intellectually
handful.
consistent that
That's
I,
that's a
yeah.
handful of
Yeah.
libertarians.
Well, I mean,
But
for
what
the
I'm
most part,
talking
right, the
about,
libertarians have always had a worldview that is patently detached from, any kind of actual, realpolitik sort of way
right?
of looking at the world. I mean, it's
Open
always been,
open borders.
right.
Uh,
Open
uh,
borders. The U.S. really doesn't have enemies. If we just engage in free trade with people, they're never going to
right.
want to harm us. I mean, all of this stuff that has now been thoroughly debunked. Listen, I love it. In a perfect world, what do we say? If men were angels, government would not be necessary. But
Right.
whoever, I know you're much
Right.
better at those quotes than I am, Jerry.
I think that the conversation though is becoming or coming to a point of no return because
How long,
how
Jerry? How long until the point of no return? Sorry. I'm an asshole. I
I do,
apologize.
but I'm concerned about this because you and I do what we do, whether it's
Right.
at CPAC or Real Clear Politics. We do these things because we want to persuade, we want to make sure that the culture and the politics and the policy are such that our kids can grow up in a free America. But you have too many people who turn their positions 180 degrees depending upon whether it's Trump or not. Trump could come out against abusing children,
Right.
and the left and the legacy media would defend it.
Whoa, whoa,
You
whoa.
know,
Well, time out for a second. Hasn't Trump already done that, right? With the pushback on the transgender policy, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's exactly what has happened. That they then go in and do this. Donald Trump pushes back against the ability to traffic children, and they say, "Oh my God, what Donald Trump is doing to harm immigrant families," when we know that there is a substantial proportion of the kids who are coming across the border who, if we can now find them,
you bring up the border
yeah,
crisis. Um, There could be sleeper cells in the US today
yeah,
because of Biden's border
right.
crisis. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around why the Democrats, Joe Biden, really it wasn't Joe Biden, right? It was Jill Biden, Hunter Biden, and this cabal of politicos who were running the country for at least 2 years, maybe 4 years. What was their purpose for open borders?
I think it's blatant. It was blatantly political because
Yeah.
now with the way that they do the apportionment of representatives in Congress is it's based upon population, regardless of whether or not that
It's
population is here legally.
interesting. I was watching
I'm
an
pulling
old
something up,
video.
Jerry, that I want to read to you. But yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
while you look for that,
Yeah,
there
I
was a
have it.
video that was up on Twitter X yesterday, and it was from years ago, and it was a spokesperson for the Muslim Brotherhood,
Yeah,
and this spokesperson was saying, we don't want to become assimilated, we don't want to become American, we want America to become Islam.
right. Well, right.
And
Well,
again,
they want America. They want to do to America what they've done in Europe, which is,
right,
this
and,
is
and
it.
but again, it's not just the Palestinian cause or the Islamic cause that wants to transform America.
Yeah,
It's also this idea. These undocumented immigrants who are coming here are not like my wife is the daughter of
right.
immigrants. Both my in-laws are immigrants. They came here because they wanted to embrace American culture and become Americans. We are now bringing people in who have no interest in American culture, American principles, or even engaging as Americans.
Well, we
And
we
that's a
can't
problem.
have we can't have the thorough conversation about, America being able to pick and choose which people we let become. I mean, as we've said, anybody can come here and become an American. That's the beauty of the system. But they have to want to come here and become an American, right? John Wayne said it: a hyphenated American is a divided American. Just on the issue of softness, Jerry, and policy, I just want to read this because this came up yesterday. The news broke that we now know who at the White House was largely responsible for the use of the auto pen, or at least
Yes.
supervised the use of the auto pen. And it was a woman named Neera Tanden. Now, I've dealt with Neera Tanden in the past.
Where's
I
she now?
have.
She's at the Center for American
She's
Progress.
always with the exception of a few years when she's been on hiatus into the Obama administration and to the Biden White House. She was the head of the Center for American Progress, and I first met her in 2010, right after the midterm elections, and she was speaking all kinds of happy horse dung about why the Democrats lost in 2010. But I'm reminded of this because this is from a couple. This is from November of 2020, after Joe Biden had won the election. Bill Kristol wrote this. He says serious conservatives, responsible moderates, and hard headed liberals should want a tough minded OMB head. OMB is where cabinet secretaries' ill considered projects go to die, where programs are evaluated, where trade offs are made. Neera Tanden is the right person for the job. Bill Kristol says this,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
To which I replied a couple of minutes later, wrong. For the very reasons you lay out. Neera Tanden won't be a tough-minded OMB head who will nix ill-considered projects, make trade-offs, or fairly evaluate programs. I'd take Cass Sunstein over Neera Tanden 6 days a week and twice on Sundays. Tanden will be a rubber stamp. And I was right in a very real and a
In a
very
literal sense, she was
depressing sense of the word.
rubber stamping the president's signature. Now,
Right.
mind you, the auto pen is perfectly legal. The problem is, and the challenge, what I think the House Oversight Committee is trying to figure out is, was the president aware
Right.
that his signature was being affixed to these documents? Because we found out from her testimony that there are instances where she was using the auto pen when the president was working from the White House.
Yes.
So why then would you need the auto pen?
Right. Of
That's an
course.
important question. For all those in the legacy media and progressives and never Trumpers who want to warn us about we're living in tyranny, we're living in a dystopian America. Well, shouldn't you be at least curious as to whether or not the president was aware of what he was signing?
Right. And that's just it. I mean, in terms of the legality of the auto pen, I think there are degrees of difference. I think it's one thing if the auto pen is being used to sign, military proclamations or some kind of celebration. Listen, you can criticize Donald Trump all you want for being a showman, for being a P.T. Barnum-like character, for turning everything into a spectacle. But at least when he signs a piece of legislation, he wants everybody to watch him sign the piece of legislation. Right, to the point where, and I'm sure Joe Biden did some of this as well, but this idea of signing a different letter with a different pen so he can hand it over to
Right.
somebody else. But there's a certain degree of transparency. The exhibitionist wants to be watched at all times. He wants
Right.
to say, look at me.
Again, and you mentioned an important word there, transparency.
Oh, I thought it was exhibitionist, Jerry, but thank
Well,
you.
both. But again, how can we be living in this dystopian America when everything is transparent?
Right.
Like
Right.
the president tells us what he's going to do. Everything he's doing, he campaigned on all of it.
Right.
On all of it. He promised Iran won't get the nuke. He promised to deport illegal aliens. He promised to push forward his tax breaks to be extended or made permanent. Go down the list. He's not doing anything
Right.
that he didn't promise, and he's doing it transparently. The big argument that, oh my goodness, he's sending American troops against Americans. Well, no, the
Wow.
president can nationalize the National Guard, can federalize the National
Time
Guard.
and time out for a second, Jerry, because you get to this issue of the hue and cry from folks who are criticizing him. I read the executive order that Joe Biden signed authorizing this activity. Remember, Joe Biden is the one who said, signed an executive order saying that U.S. troops can be deployed to use lethal force against Americans and can do so for 96 hours, 72 or 96, without, having to report to Congress on this. Not Donald Trump. He didn't take this power. Joseph Biden was the one who did that. And yet again, I don't remember the Wally Olsons of the world, or, well, again, maybe there were some libertarians who were talking about that then. But again, it's Donald Trump. So obviously we're talking about this.
The thing is, too, is that we keep on pushing what's acceptable. There was a time very recently, Andrew, talking about as far away as 2016, where you had Hillary Clinton and the Democrats talking about the border crisis and doing something about illegal migration. We can go all the way back to 2016 when Hillary Clinton and the Democrats were talking about they will not allow Iran to get the nuke. In fact, when years ago, Hillary Clinton promised as president, quote, she would attack Iran.
Right.
Now, my point is that I'm not saying, whataboutism or they did it so we can do it. What I'm saying is Hillary was right about immigration. She was right about Iran, just like Trump is right today about immigration and Iran.
And the more to the point, it's not about the whataboutism. It is about underscoring that some people are serious when they say something, and other folks are making empty promises and lying to you about it. And that's and worse, what I'm going to read to you from Joe Biden and the Democrats saying one thing and doing just the opposite. I mean, that's exactly it. What they're upset about is that Donald Trump is doing what he promised, as you just said. So let me get back to what I was saying here about this lethal force thing, because I pulled up my tweet on this, and I'm going to retweet this in a little bit. This is from October 25th of 2024. And I write, as just discussed on WCBM, DOD Directive 5240.01. DOD Directive, it's not an executive order. DOD Directive 5240.01 is real. It was issued in September 2024. And while it says that lethal force requires either SecDef or POTUS approval, in situations where there is an imminent threat to life and immediate action is required, defense intelligence components may provide support temporarily without prior authorization, but this is subject to immediate reporting and is limited to a maximum of 72 hours without further approval. So U.S. military forces and U.S. military force can be used lethally against American citizens for 72 hours without getting prior approval from the Secretary of Defense and POTUS. And so this idea that somehow Trump is acting in some way that is, again, outside the scope of the law is insane.
Where were the cries that we're living in tyranny, that we're living in dystopian America? It'll be an interesting experiment, Andrew.
Yes.
Would be to put that on social media, but don't attribute it to the Biden years and say something like, is this what you voted for? Or this is the directive, and just see what the response is, and then respond and saying, "Oh, by the way, no, this is Trump tyranny. This is Nazism," and then remind folks, "Well, no, this was Joe Biden."
Yeah, I think
a couple of years ago.
I think that's a good idea, and so I'm just seeing who had spoken out against it, and very, very few people had. I mean, this is nothing new. And the hypocrisy is nothing.
The intensity is new. The level of the hypocrisy has always been present in politics, but the intensity is different. And again, I'm afraid we're getting to a point of no return where nothing is real. Look, I'll give
Well,
you an
yeah.
example. The COVID-19 response was politicized by Joe Biden, by the legacy media, by public health entities. And because of that, untruths, lies, phony narratives, we now know that many of the recommendations from CDC, many of the things, items, actions that people were arrested for, like
Right.
going to a public beach,
Ain't crazy.
arrested,
Right.
going
Yes.
to church, arrested, pastors arrested. We now know from Dr. Birx's, her own words, that they made these things up, and they made them up because they had to do something.
Right.
Dr. Fauci has now. My point is that they lied to us, and because they lied to us, many Americans today don't trust public health at
Right.
all, and
Right.
don't trust vaccines. And we're seeing that there are bad health outcomes when we can't trust public health officials and when we don't trust vaccines. But this was a government crisis.
Right.
And instead of trying, a government created crisis.
Yes.
And instead of trying to reset and move forward, they're doubling down on just being wrong.
Right.
And I'm afraid that when Trump is done, and he's done in 3 years, we're not going to have that reckoning where the other side, where the media will say, you know what? A lot of our opposition here, a lot of our hyperbolic speech here was nonsense. Because how do we go back to normal?
No, well, that's just it. Well, listen, I think some of it has to do with some of these folks in the legacy media being held accountable and actually losing their jobs. I mean, set aside the politicians for a moment, but you get the folks who are now getting fired from CNN and MSNBC, who are now finding, and this is not casting aspersions on anybody who goes and opens up a Substack and gets subscribers, and that's how they're making their money. If they're making their money, more power to them. But the reality is that, as they move off of these legacy media platforms, I think there is some accountability that takes shape. But then again, right, as you saw with the above the top reaction to Donald Trump's action over the weekend, where it comes down to some simplicity, and I maybe I'm all over the place here, Jerry, and I apologize. I have noticed among some folks who were never Trumpers or Trump skeptics that when they think a little bit more empirically about the various choices that Donald Trump was forced to make, or not Donald Trump was forced to make, that we made, that Trump made the right decisions. Now, he might have made them for the wrong reasons. I'm not so sure that really matters. But when you get, the Dan McLaughlins of the world at National Review writing stuff that is thoughtful on this, that gives me a certain degree of optimism.
Well, let me ask you this, because
Yeah.
we're in the midst of primary season in certain states, New Jersey, New York, elsewhere. We know that on the national level, Gavin Newsom and Governor Wes Moore from Maryland, Tim Walz from Minnesota, and others
Wow.
are making their pitch to be, for a national campaign. But I want to focus on New York City just for a second here.
Please. That's a good
And
idea.
it goes to the flow of our conversation. So candidate Mamdani.
Yeah. Is that his name?
Mamdani, yes.
Yes.
Mamdani, Mamdani.
I loved his TV series from the 70s with his sister
But
Marie.
this is someone who is just recently a U.S. citizen. He's only been a citizen, I think, for 6 years or 7 years. Someone who comes out of the very elite university class. His father is a university professor, activist. He's kind of a trust fund type.
Sure.
Has resources. He's never held a job. He was a rapper for a bit.
Oh, yeah.
He is or was a New York City a New York City Council member.
He was a New York City Council member, not a state assemblyman. There was
Correct.
some question about that this
City
morning
Council
on
member.
radio.
Yeah. But here's my point. My point is he's anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
He's certainly anti-Israel.
Yep.
He says that if the prime minister of Israel would step foot in New York City, i.e., go to the UN, he would have New York City police arrest the prime minister.
Sure.
All the while defunding the police, right?
Right.
He wants to defund the police. He wants to make groceries free, healthcare free. He
Babysitting
wants
free.
to give public transportation for free. Uh, his his electorate, he won 43% of the Democratic primary. Now, if
Yes.
you crunch the numbers, 43% of the Democrat electorate is only 9% of New York City voters. So a small fraction
Whoa,
of New
whoa, whoa,
York.
whoa, 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 whoa. Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. What percentage of New York City voters are Democratic?
I don't know, but overwhelming, they're Democratic
No,
voters.
that's what I'm saying. So 43% of the Democratic voters.
432,000 New Yorkers voted for him.
Oh, I see, I see, I see, I
432,000
see. Of the voters in the primary, it
only
represents
represents
9%
nine
of
percent
got it, got it, got it. Yes.
of the overall voting age
Got it.
population, or
If
registered
if if
voters in New
all of
York.
them had voted and none of the above had been a possibility, none of the above would have won
Right, but
handily.
here's the
Yes.
thing: we now have the numbers of who voted for him. Overwhelmingly, rich, elite, white, young, university educated.
Yes.
This is the base of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And unless there are reasonable Democrats to stand up, I'm afraid we're going to lose Democratic Party forever. Not lose them.
Okay, but all right,
The right,
is this,
many of
but
our friends on the right will
is,
say the party's dying. It's not dying.
no,
The
no, no, but
party's actually
okay, but is this part of our
resurging.
problem, Jerry? I mean,
What?
we conservatives have been so successful at winning, essentially driving blue dog Democrats out of and centrist Democrats out of existence, right? Have we not been so successful on our own
Well, I'm not
side that
sure
we have?
if Republicans have driven them out or if the Democratic Party has driven them out of the party. Remember, my
I
family
think it's both. I think
were
it's a combination of the two.
yeah, but the thing is that my worry is that where the is it the Overton window?
Yes,
What's acceptable is increasingly
shifting to the left.
rapidly
Yes.
moving more and more to the left.
Well, with the Overton window in terms of leftist politics, I think is doing that. I think,
I
by and
think in terms
large,
of politics overall.
no, because I think, Jerry, we've seen a lot of this, right? This gets into the common sense movement. I think we're talking about two different
You
things
and I
here.
are going to be at a dinner tonight, and we're going to talk about Medicaid reform.
Yes.
And there are going to be reasonable people around this table who are going to be apoplectic over the fact that those who are here illegally should not receive Medicare benefits.
Right.
That should be a point of consensus where everyone agrees or near agrees that if you're in the country illegally, you shouldn't get health care benefits.
Feeling I have but okay. I think we're talking about two different things.
Clarify.
Let me underscore why that is. I think you have things like sexual politics and immigration politics generally with the entire population that as the Democratic Party moves leftward, the population, the mainstream population, the bulk of the voting electorate is staying where they are. Maybe on the margin.
I don't agree with that.
No, because Jerry, I mean, listen, I think this is why we're seeing parents stepping up in places like Montgomery County, and they're winning.
Andrew, in our lifetime, not long ago, California was a base state for Republicans. Colorado.
Okay,
wait.
Jerry,
Colorado,
this is an age-old thing. I understand this, but what
New
I'm saying is,
Mexico
what you are
Arizona
seeing.
was.
This is why my point is, yes, I agree with you. Again, two different things here, because I think there is the movement leftward, and then there is the question of whether or not there is no limit to that movement leftward. And I think there is a limit to that movement leftward.
But they're on. If you think about it, though, Andrew, this is nice because we don't agree here. I think the left is on the ascent. I think the left is, even with their absolute, we're
Jerry,
redefining. We're redoing two things. We're redefining what crazy is, and we are defining, like he warned us, Daniel Patrick Moynihan. We are defining deviancy down, which is why electoral the electoral map is so competitive where it shouldn't be. And
Well,
part of this is what has the bringing in tens of millions of non-Western, non folks who don't understand American principles, bringing them in, putting them in the public school system where they are indoctrinated, then putting them in the university systems where they are activated.
right, but the other part of this is if what you were saying was true, then you would see the majority of the electorate not supporting the deportation efforts here. You would not see efforts at the local level where folks are sort of raising the question,
The
"Oh my goodness, hold
Andrew,
on, hold
okay.
on. What happens if we allow folks who massive amounts of kids who don't speak English into our schools? What is the functional impact of all of this? Or, what happens when you try to push your sexual mores on non-Christian religious
I
conservatives
Andrew,
and they
you are
react?
right.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that population of Americans is waning, growing smaller.
I don't think that's the case. I think if that were the case, then the Democrats would not be so deeply concerned
Well, then
by
if
efforts
that's
to,
not the
to
case,
deport
then
people.
how do you explain uh, Tim Walz in Minnesota, Gavin Newsom in California? How do you explain Westmoreland, Maryland? How do you explain Memdani in New York City?
Okay, but Jerry,
How do you
this
explain?
is
Wait,
but
wait.
these are
How do you
very
explain?
specific. Hold on, because these are very specific instances in which, okay, I mean, I can take them all in turn, right? I mean, California absolutely has spent years sort of refining the liberal narrative and has attracted people in there, and as a result, right, the California Republican Party has in turn been in a shambles, right? Where you
But
have
but
the
wait, wait,
the hold
wait,
on,
wait,
when
wait,
you have the when
define
you have
shambles. They control everything.
no, the California Republican Party is in a
Oh,
shambles.
I'm
They don't
sorry. Yes,
control anything.
Democrats. I'm
And
sorry.
yes, yes. So the same thing with Maryland, right? Where in Maryland you have the Maryland Republican Party largely in a shambles and unable to push back. I don't know specifically. I mean, I do a weekly hit in Minnesota, but some of it has to do with when you have urban populations that get bigger and you have urban populations that have larger amounts of migrants, both legal and illegal. This changes things drastically. But when
Again,
you look
the
at, hold on, when you look
GOP.
at the aggregate polling and when you look at what's happening in a lot of these other communities, what you're seeing is folks who are starting to stand firm on things like transgender policy. Um,
But transgender policy is still on the ascent.
I
It's
don't think
still
so.
sure.
I don't
I, I,
agree with you. I mean,
I,
Jerry, I think
I
if it were on the
but
ascent,
this is
you
but
wouldn't
there,
have,
but
hold
this
on,
is
if it
not
were
like a
on the
he said,
ascent,
she said. I
you
mean,
wouldn't listen, you wouldn't have, what's her name? Simone Biles would not have had to delete her social media account when she tried to take a swipe at Riley Gaines. But the hue and cry in support of Riley Gaines was so overwhelming. Simone Biles realized, oh, maybe I really did step in this here. This is bad juju on our part. The more boys pretending to be girls who win state sports
they're
championships,
still winning.
but
In fact, there's
but
more, not less.
but but on the other hand, this is raising the issue so that more and more communities are pushing
Look,
back on
Andrew,
this.
I understand your
Yes.
point.
Yeah.
There is growing outrage, perhaps.
Yes.
That outrage is not translating into policy. And again, evidence of that is look at the GOP, look at the 1984 election, where Republicans won 49 states. And the Republican conservative movement since 84 has been losing sections, whole sections of the country. There's nowhere in America. Wait, let me just finish. There's
Yeah.
nowhere in America where Democrats can't win. But there's lots of places in America where Republicans cannot win.
I don't think that's true. I think there are places where Democrats can't win. I mean, I think you have solidly red states, solidly conservative states and
There
localities.
again.
But I
You have
think,
so,
hold on, Jerry, I think part of it is as more folks in these blue states flee these blue states and go elsewhere, that's part of the problem because they take their politics with them. But the reality is, right, we are seeing these glimmers here and there as folks are saying, there are limits to what we are willing to take. Yeah, of
But
course.
we're coming out of Pride Month, and DC, for crying out loud, was literally shut down with Pride celebrations. And
Right,
again,
but that's
not
DC.
not
That's not the
respect for
difference
our
is, hold on, but the difference is, right, if what you were saying were true, right? We know that in Maryland, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, and Montgomery County are going to be X, Y, and Z. Howard County, I would probably include in this. But Washington County, Somerset County, Worcester County, Queen Anne's County, Talbot County, and there you're going to have the pockets of liberalism in the towns and anywhere place that has a
you
college.
make a good point, and we
Yeah,
don't have to belabor this, but I'll just say
yeah,
this and use Maryland as an example. There was a time in Maryland where Montgomery County was competitive, where Frederick County was Republican. It's now completely controlled by Democrats. Where Howard County and Baltimore County were competitive. Those counties are all most of Maryland, the central part of Maryland, and Anne Arundel County used to be competitive. No competition there whatsoever anymore.
I think a lot of this comes down to state party politics, county party politics. I think who gets
All right.
elected to central
My last
committees.
word on this is that
Yeah.
I think it's because I just yes, of course you're right,
Remember what I've
but
said.
I think it's
Hold
also
on, Jerry.
the more
You say your
alarming
last word, then
thing
I'll say my
is
last word on this.
the most alarming thing though is that it's also because of bringing in millions of immigrants who have no idea of what being an American is. Number one, number two, the failed public school systems that we have,
Right.
and the very dangerous university systems, and the legacy media, which is advocacy media.
Well, yeah, but and let me add to this, the issue of the legacy media and the ability of one side to control the narrative in which if you raise any questions about gender policy, sexual policy, immigration policy, whatever, they can immediately label you and demonize you, right? You're a racist, you're a xenophobe, you're a sexist, you're a trans, you're a homophobe, whatever. That's part of the issue. They've been able to very successfully do that, and we've pushed back against this. Let me add to this, Jerry, the other part of the problem, which is that right now our political milieu is such that it's the party in a race that screws up the least that wins. It's not the party that has the better ideas or the better messaging. It's the party that is least bad, and that's a real problem. Jerry, I know you're looking down at your phone. I know you got to go because you got stuff to do here. You're doing some fill-in work in the next couple of weeks on
Oh yeah,
WBAL.
I have my show on Sundays, the
Yes.
Jerry Rogers show over at WBAL. But yeah, I'm going to do some fill-in work at WBAL a couple three times coming up the next week, and then also the podcast, The Business of America. We just dropped another episode today. It's
Woohoo!
weekly. We're looking at the doers of the economy, doers in science and medicine, and of course, real
Not
clear policy for health.
not doers in water, but doers in the
Hey,
economy.
yes. Also, I tell you
Hey yo,
another thing. I co-authored a paper with Peter Pitts for the Center for Medicine and Public Interest,
nice.
and so on the need for bringing the insurance industry, insurance policy into the public discussion over how we deal with healthcare costs. So,
Excellent.
yeah, I'm busy.
Good. I That's excellent stuff. And likewise, I do my weekly podcast for the Federal Newswire, the Lunch Hour. We just completed a special series, almost 24 podcasts on the REINS Act, this regulatory accountability thing. You can find those there. I am going to be doing a ton of fill-in work next week. I'm in for Tony Katz on WIBC, June 30th through July 3rd. On Independence Day itself, I'm in for Larry O'Connor on O'Connor and Company, 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. So go and check. Jerry, I may be calling on you for a brief interview. We may pre-record that as well. Jerry, what do you want folks to do? Find the truth?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You froze there for a second.
Yeah, so did you.
The nature of podcasting. Yes, find the truth, plant your feet, stand firm. God bless you. Thank you.
Normally I would say have a great week, have fun and stay safe, but I will now close by saying thank you very much for your attention to this matter.